All right. Well, welcome everyone to our very first roundtable of the Transformative Play Initiative. We are very excited to speak with you and share with you what we're doing at Uppsala University's Game Design Department. And we're just going to do a brief round of introductions for those of us who are involved in this initiative. So I'll start. My name is Sarah Lynn Bowman. I am a researcher at the department, and I also work at Austin Community College as a humanities and peace and conflict studies professor. And I'm very interested in the way that transformative play can help us work through challenges in life, things that might be difficult to approach outside of a context that play is involved in. And so play can kind of be this lubricant in a way to allow us to access parts of ourselves that might otherwise be scary or challenging. So next I'll go with Doris, our fearless leader, who has wrangled us all together.
Hi, I'm Doris Carmen Rouge. I am an associate professor right now at Uppsala University, the Department of Game Design. I'm a still quite recent transplant from the US, where I spent most of my career studying games and deep games. And right now I am in charge of the master program. I am the deputy department head of this department, and I'm also the research director. And I have this enormous privilege to work with this group of super engaged and talented people where we explore transformative play. And my personal approach to this is, I think play is wonderful. It is a mindset more than an activity. To me, it's what gets our back off the wall when we are stuck. And I have been really, really curious about how we can use playing games to learn something about ourselves and to grow as people, to practice empathy, and to change us and our environments for the better.
And next, let's go with Josephine Westbrook, or Sparkles, as she is known.
That is known now. So yes, my name is Josephine Westborg, and sometimes here at work I go by Sparkles because we are two Josephine, and that makes it easier. And I'm here because I'm a research assistant at Uppsala University, and I came in specifically to work with this and transformative play. And my interest in this has to do with learning and education, and how can transformative play help with that, and when is it not very good, and what do you need to think about? And I've been interested in this for quite a while, and here I saw a chance to learn more and find out more and spread knowledge. That's why I'm here.
Wonderful. And next, let's go with Josephine Baird, or Precocious, as she's known.
Yes, I'm occasionally known as Precocious, as our other Josephine pointed out. There's two of us. Yes, I am a lecturer here at the University of Uppsala, teaching on game design. I'm also a PhD candidate at the University of Vienna, just to make things interesting. I am studying game design in relation to trans-subjectivities, how we can explore, experiment, and embody ourselves within games. And that's why I'm so interested in transformative play, the opportunity to explore ourselves, to realize an authentic self through play, and to transform, quite figuratively and literally and emotionally. And these are absolute personal as well as academic and scholarly interests, and I'm tremendously grateful and happy to be part of this team.
And last but certainly not least, we have Kjell.
My name is Kjell. I'm an independent game creator, writer, and occasionally theorist. I've created role-playing games for over 20 years, and by doing that over time, I've gotten more and more interested in how we can use games for transformative impacts on players, on designers, and the world as it is. And more and more also into how we can use games to raise awareness around issues, and without being too political about it, actually reaching political aims and changing people's understanding of complex issues through games. And I'm also super happy to be part of this team. I learn a lot from these amazing thinkers and minds that you have already been introduced to, and I can't wait to see what the future will bring.
Well, we're going to be talking a little bit about the future that we're envisioning towards the end of this discussion. But first, I just want us to kind of go a little deeper into this concept of transformative play. So we're going to use these little prompts as ways for us to approach that. And this prompt is, transformative play means blank to me. So let's start with Precocious.
Oh my goodness, I'm on the spot. Transformative play to me means to me opportunity. An opportunity to reflect, an opportunity to consider, to literally play, to find another way, to consider alternatives in cultures, societies that often require us to behave in very set patterns, to basically inhabit roles that were cast for us before we were even given the option to even consider them. The opportunity and the chance to transform through play is truly magical, special, and authentic. It's an experience that I've had personally, and it's an experience I know others have had, and I'm very keen to explore that in itself through study, through design, through conversation. But it is always an opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. How about Sparkles?
Transformative play mean learning to me. That's what a lot of things mean to me. I have those glasses on a lot. For me, it's about when you have a learning experience and you get those slightly deeper aha moments where it all kind of falls into place and you just view things in a new way and go, whoa, oh, that's magic. And I think play is a very good way of getting there, because you have that in play also when you're not way too blocked up by other things. You have to just go into it. But also the reflective part, because without that, I don't think you will have that experience. They're connected and there's something important there. And yeah, so change and learning experiences, but also personal change and learning experiences, not just learning how to do a specific math thing. It's about who we are, about identity, and about learning bigger concepts for me.
Wonderful. Shell, what about you?
Transformative play to me. Well, first of all, to me, it's helpful to make a distinction if I'm thinking as a player or as a game designer and creator. And in regards to the latter, to me, it's always about trying to create a setting, an environment, a container even, where you open the door for people, for players to find within themselves. Because to me, all transformation comes from inside on an individual basis. They're just opening the door, giving them the opportunity to explore what that door, behind that door, and taking with them, if they find something helpful, something meaningful there, taking that with them into their lives after the game. So much more than telling people how this should work, it's more about creating an atmosphere, the setting where it can happen, and then allowing people to find it within themselves.
Great. And I think just related to that, this idea that no game is inherently transformative is important to state, that it's really more of a potential space rather than something that changes you. Doris.
This is great. I got a chance to think while other people spoke eloquently about this. Now, I think, Sarah, what you said just now about no game being inherently transformative, it's what we make of it. Absolutely. That's what I meant when I said play is a mind state. It's a state of mind rather than just an activity. You can see two people doing the same activity. One is at play and the other is just performing an activity. So to me, all play in this mindset understanding is transformative because it allows me to get over myself. It allows me to tap into parts of myself that might be pushed aside because I have to play certain roles in a professional setting or a private setting or whatever. But when I'm truly playful, I don't care about any of this. I can just be, and I can just be my best, most authentic self. And I can explore what would happen if. And so trying out these new ways of acting and being suddenly increased that repertoire of available strategies, available ways of looking at things, new perspectives, new mindsets. And I find solutions to problems, small and big, when I can be in this state of play. And so any form of any opportunity, any door that can open for me where I can be playful is a huge gift. And I really, really hope that we can provide these opportunities for others through the initiatives that we are creating together now, because it's really precious.
I definitely agree. And I like that emphasis on providing experiences for others, because I think for me, I've had so many transformative experiences myself, and I've watched it happen for so many people I know. And then also I've studied it for so long that it's very clear to me that this is a profoundly important activity for a lot of people that has been helped them make meaningful changes in their lives that last far beyond the experience itself. And kind of to respond also to what Sparkles was talking about in terms of learning, you know, this big question I have is, what is it about that state that allows for us to shift into this other, more authentic, more spontaneous self, ego state, identity, however you want to call it. And so we call that alibi. The fiction gives us this alibi to jump into a playful state and not feel so worried about the consequences of what we do. But also, what allows us to transfer that information into our daily lives? Not necessarily exactly what happened in that fiction, but whatever insights we learned, whatever takeaways that we want to distill, how do we then bring that into our daily lives? So that's really what's interesting to me, because I see so much potential in this form that I think we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of what it can do. All right, so next we're going to sort of map the landscape a little bit about our backgrounds and what we're bringing to the initiative, what our interests are with regard to transformative play specifically. We've touched upon this obviously a little bit, but we're going to go into a little bit more detail about our backgrounds and, you know, some relevant experience that we bring to the table. So Cheryl, would you like to start us off to talk a little bit about Nordic LARP and your engagement with political themes?
Sure. The first thing I can say about Nordic LARP is that even the scholars don't agree on a definition of what it is, but I will give it a try here. This is my ever-changing but workable definition. Nordic LARP, live action role-playing, it's a tradition that has its roots, at least in the Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. You recognize it with it's a tradition that is built a lot on collective and collaborative creation, both when it comes to design principles in the tradition itself, but also when it comes to specific events, design in games, and so on. It tends to be very light on rules, and the rules that do exist, there tends to be a want to create them as unobtrusive as possible. In this tradition, there's a lot of different themes, a lot of different settings that are being explored, and quite often very heavy themes. So as a working definition, I tend to say that it's hard to define it, but I recognize it when I see it. And I've spent, well, 20 plus years, both as a player and as a designer, creator within this tradition. I believe when it comes to transformative potential, Nordic LARP might not be unique, but it's one of those traditions where we can take what we've already spent decades learning, designing, and figuring out how to do, and apply that to reach transformative or get transformative potential in our games. And you specifically wanted me to talk about political games. Just as I said earlier, when it comes to wanting to use this tradition, these design principles to create political games or to make people aware of issues, it's super important that we open the door. You cannot force anybody to change their mind about anything by running a game for them like this. It needs to be the player themselves that find that transformative impact within your game and then choose to either disregard it or take it with them in their lives. As an example right now, and this might be a little bit obscure and probably tells a little bit about where my design lies, I have been for a little while designing a larger game about the mining industry in West Virginia and the impact it has on West Virginian society historically and also presently. And the aim of that game for me is, as we all know, well, maybe we don't all know, but West Virginia is one of those states in the US which is pretty far right-leaning in every election. And sometimes there's a disconnect in understanding there because it's a fairly poor state. It's a lot of working people there. And for us in a Scandinavian setting, of course, we are accustomed to people, to working class people being more on the left. So the game is basically just created to create or to allow for players to experience the lives and the emotions of people who are far removed from them on a political spectrum. Of course, players of Nordic LARP tend to be pretty far left. And just by creating this atmosphere, this setting, where people can experience this, I mean, caveat, of course, they won't experience exactly what it is, but get a taste of it. We hope that could create more understanding, maybe some empathy, and maybe building some bridges in a political landscape that is very divided right now. Polarized, that's what I'm looking for.
Thank you so much. And then also a member of the Nordic LARP tradition is Sparkles, and specifically this trajectory of EduLARP that has not just emerged in Nordic LARP, but certainly there's been a lot of discourse around it in there. So if you'd like to tell us about your involvement with that, great.
Sure. So my background within this started with me. Started LARPing in the Nordic LARP community when I was 17, I think. Celebrating 20 years this year, woohoo! And I also started studying game design. And as part of that, we were to create educational games. And I did this and realized that there is something to this. I want to do this more. But maybe I should also know something about how learning and education works. So I started to study pedagogy to learn about that. And then I started my own company based on all of this. So for almost 10 years, I've been running a company working with EduLARPs, creating LARPs for schools based on the school curriculum here in Sweden, but also doing LARPs for companies and museums and many different types of institutions. And through this, I started realizing that when talking to non-LARPers, I spent a lot of time explaining how this could be interesting or why this could be good. But most people could see that there might be something here. But then the other way around, I have to spend a lot of time with LARPers telling why it isn't good or when it isn't good, because it's not good for everything, because it's not the magic tool that will solve all the problem with education, because there is no such tool. We would have found it by now. But I meet that a lot. I learned loads, therefore this must be great for everyone. You also like LARP. If you're not that into it, maybe you won't learn as much. And I think there's something interesting here, and that's also what I'm trying to bring in to find out, like, where is it good, when, and how do we create this kind of container with the open doors to give the possibility for change, and how can we help that to happen and give people tools to work with this, but also see when is it not very good, what is it not good for, to understand this. So this provoked me more and more, and now I left my company in the hands of my old colleagues, and instead I'm here and want to find out more about this.
Wonderful. What about you, Doris? Can you tell us a little bit about the background that you're approaching transformative play with?
Sure. I do not have this extensive LARP experience at all, but I grew up role-playing all the time with my mom. And back then I thought I was sure going to be an actress. And then I also just wanted to play the tragic roles. Everybody cracked down laughing because they said, no, you're a comedian. And I thought, no, maybe then I don't want to do that. So I studied literature and theater and philosophy, and at some point found my way into video games because, and that's such a stereotypical story, I'm almost ashamed, but my ex-boyfriend played a lot of video games, and so I was the girlfriend of the guy who plays video games who got into video games. But the way I approached video games was still from this original impetus that I had, that playing is great and enacting roles is great, and there is something to be done with this medium that is more than just blowing stuff up. And so I became a postdoctoral researcher at MIT, the Gambit Game Lab, and I started investigating emotional components or aspects of video games, particularly how can we make games that are about something? How can we make games that provide insight into the human experience and what it means to be human? And how can we do so in a way that really not just communicates this through story, but makes it tangible through the actual mechanics of the game, through the moment-to-moment interaction? And it led me down a path of exploring and researching structural metaphors. So I took a cognitive linguistics approach to this, and which suited me well coming from language and linguistics, and applied that to game design, and sort of accidentally coined the term deep games, and I wrote a book about it. And deep games are games that have a metaphorical surface, but underneath it, they are about something else. Like they have a literal surface, and underneath it, they're about something else. That's the metaphor. And also quite accidentally, I happened to make these games about all sorts of mental health topics. So the very first game was about addiction, and then I made one with a psychiatrist, Attila Ceranoglu, on depression, so that was called Elude. And then a lot of other games about anxiety disorder and youth and mental health issues. There was a transmedia project called For the Record. So a lot of projects that went along the lines of this deep game stuff that dealt with the mental health issues. And then I happened to have a little bit of a crisis because it was in this Games for Change field. That's where I presented at the conference. That's where I published. And everybody asked, well, is it working? I was like, what do you mean it's working? Like when I read The Catcher in the Rye, nobody gave me a questionnaire afterwards and said, by how many percentages do you feel more understood in your teenage angst now? So it's just, to me, it was just art, and art can be transformative. Why do I have to prove it in this manner? But of course, yeah, there is a point to it. But I got a little bit frustrated. Also, by not being able to reach really, or not knowing if I reached the people I wanted to reach. And I thought, there is something about the physicality, the immediacy of role play, of being with other people. Like I got this when I play tested the video games, when I was there with actual players, observing them playing, especially, and that was so cool, when they played together a single player game. They sat in front of the computer, 5 girls, for example, playing Soteria, the anti-anxiety game, and they gave each other tips. And there was so much more learning and so much more transformation going on in this discourse amongst the players than the game in and of itself could have provided. And I thought, this, this whole physical, in real life, happening interaction between players, that's the ticket. That's what I want to do. I don't care if I reach millions. I want to reach people for real. And then I found Sarah and everything happened from there.
Happily ever after. Wonderful, thank you. Precocious.
Oh my goodness, how to follow that? It feels like an origin story, and I guess I have my own. I, in some ways, have an interesting background to this as well. I come from a background of queer experience and queer performance, in the sense that I wasn't studying games when I first came. I wasn't studying games initially when I came to the universities. I was studying gender studies and psychology and philosophy, and eventually queer experience and then trans experience. And the reason I was doing that was because I was trying to find myself, I suppose. I came out in an environment that wasn't the most supportive, and so the quickest way that I found to learning about something was trying to find it in books. And then when I couldn't find that, I started going into queer spaces, community spaces, like what Doris was saying about people coming together. And one of the things that I found almost immediately was that they were some of the most playful spaces I've ever been in, on a regular basis. Performance and play and role play and expression, not of necessarily the real life or the self, but of experience in all sorts of different ways. And I found a home there, and specifically a home in play and performance. And prior to coming to these communal environments, I'd always played games. I mean, I have a lifelong passion for games. So coming to a game design and a game design department and teaching on this is not unusual. But coming to a space of performance and role play as something transformative, that's something that I came through an experience that wasn't necessarily called that initially, because I was in these environments where people would play roles and play different roles of versions of themselves on a regular basis. If you went to a club, a queer space, one of the most common and exciting things was to see who your friend would come as next. What version of themselves would they present? What costume would they envision? What behavior would they create? What name would they choose? What gender identity might they espouse next? And what I didn't realize at the time, and look at in hindsight, was that we were all trying to express something internal externally, to explore and experiment, to embody ourselves in an environment that really didn't have a language for that or opportunity to do that in any other way. because society doesn't allow us to play like this. Society gives us a character, casts us a certain role, and we have to produce that role, whether we relate to it or not. In these environments, people were trying to recreate themselves in different ways. And what I ended up becoming was a performer, an actor. And I would perform on stage characters that were loud and vivacious and odd and unusual. And I thought I was being so tremendously creative when I was making these characters. When I realized that actually they were just versions of myself, that I was just exploring different aspects of who I was, different aspects of me. And eventually I ended up starting to create different performances were based on that idea. Several performances that were about finding an authentic self by playing different roles. I had drag roles, I had characters, I had people I would play on the stage. And in the end, I started to realize that as a trans person myself, I'd been exploring an authentic self, trying to find a real self through play in all sorts of ways. Yes, on the stage, yes, in this community, but through games. Even as a young child, I was doing this through role-playing games. I remember formative moments playing Dungeons and Dragons in the high school library, where I had a very similar experience as the one I was experiencing in these queer communities. I had a personal experience one-on-one with Final Fantasy VII when I was able to play a cis guy role who was wearing a dress. And it was like, oh my God, this is me. I can inhabit this role. And I remember that moment when I was considering how we as trans people often try and find our authentic selves initially through play. And that's what led me here, to study play as a form of exploration, of experimentation. What led me to the Uppsala University was being asked to consult on a game, not necessarily the one I ended up consulting on here, but before that, about being authentically true to yourself. And coming to the Uppsala University through that has been an absolute delight. And what I found here was an opportunity to discuss that in a transformative sense, in the sense that we can find our authentic self by transforming our experience through play. That doesn't necessarily mean that we transition or transform ourselves. Interesting thing that I've been starting to consider is actually through taking on a role, we take on an authentic role, a role that's closer to ourselves. And that's how I came here, through queer performance and queer theory. And that's what I'm trying to bring to transformative play in my own work.
Thank you so much. I have a lot of ways that I could answer this question, but I think for me, I've always had a very deep interest in psychology, especially psychoanalysis. So the ways in which our unconscious manifests through our creative processes and what it's trying to communicate with us and how we can work with it through expression. And so, you know, when I started role playing at around 15 with online games, and then I first started LARPing at 19 and did my first tabletop in my 20s. I definitely had like a theater background and improv background, so I just thought of it kind of as improvisational theater. But I always was interested in, first of all, people's motivations for why they were doing these activities, which sometimes were vastly different from one another, which I found super fascinating because I had these assumptions about the way why people enjoy these things. And then also just watching people working through things through play that I know that they have difficulties with in their life, and undergoing those kinds of processes myself. And so when it came time to write a PhD dissertation, I was initially going to talk about archetypes and fantasy fiction, and you know, that's been done. But what I really, really wanted to talk about is the people that I know that are embodying these archetypes through play, and how interesting that is. Like, what are their experiences like as they're tapping into these parts of self that are in some ways deeply personal and in other ways transcendent. What does it mean to play one's inner child or to play a goddess? Like, you know, we have that kind of range within us, and role playing gives us the alibi. It gives us these social stages to find those parts of ourselves and allow them to express themselves. Now, whenever I talk to people about this, though, they would get really uncomfortable. And somebody literally told me one time, "This sounds like psychology." And I'm like, well, of course it's psychology. We all have brains and we're doing this embodied psychological experience. So of course, you know, but it made people deeply uncomfortable. And so I had to kind of walk a line when I was writing the dissertation of how can I be accessible to a lot of different people who play for a variety of different reasons. And also, how can I address these deeper questions of identity that I think that Precocious really hit on well, like the fact that these experiences are quite transformational. And so I wrote about community building and learning skills, because that's one of the really practical things that we can use role playing for. And then also these kind of deeper identity exploration questions. And since then, I've become interested in studying EduLARP, and I'm particularly interested in games that can help us with emotional challenges. So either crisis management, so skills that we can build to help other people when they're going through emotional challenge. I've done some consulting work for creating scenarios for psychiatric nursing. So, you know, when you're dealing with a client that is having an episode of some sort, you know, sort of having an embodied role player playing that out respectfully. And so often we did try to find people with that background to embody those roles when possible. But how do you de-escalate in a way that is humanistic, basically, that's humane and is not harming or restricting someone? And I've also done similar kinds of scenarios for how to handle crisis within role-playing communities, because we have, you know, trauma that can occur. We have harassment. We have, you know, bleed, where things are very emotionally overwhelming sometimes for people. And so, you know, how do we, as people who run events on a very practical level, how do we learn the skills to be able to help people when they're in these kinds of states? And I also am very interested in exploring relationship and intimacy dynamics through play. So I, together with Danny Higgins, who is a psychotherapist, we created a game called Symbiosis, which is about dysfunctional relationship dynamics, and trying to learn more functional ones. So throughout the course of play, people will start out with, you know, and these are dynamics that are well established in counseling theory. They would play these characters that have these dynamics with one another, and the whole point of play was for the characters in game to learn these more symbiotic traits that are mutually supportive of one another, rather than trying to take energy from one another on a more unconscious level. And so, like, I'm the kind of designer where I'm only really interested in mechanics if they're meaningful. And I really appreciate Doris's work in this regard as well. It's like, what is this mechanic doing? And what does it tell us about the human condition? And if it doesn't tell us anything, then is it necessary, really? You know, and that kind of goes to the Nordic LARP stuff as well. You know, like, what tools do we have to make players feel more comfortable, and also to help them gain insight about the human existence? I guess that's kind of what I'm most interested in. Great. So next we're going to share a personally transformative experience I have had through games or performance, either one, is blank. So let's start with Precocious. The last time.
I was hoping you wouldn't start with me, because I
can start somewhere else if you want to think about it.
Maybe I've got too many, actually. That's the thing, is like picking one. No, I could probably pick one if I can just sort myself out. I've been lucky enough to have many, as I'm sure everyone here can attest to. I mentioned a couple already. The one as a teenager playing Dungeons and Dragons. Another was playing Final Fantasy VII, which I did again very recently, and saw that moment again in myself. But perhaps one that sticks to mind in terms of performance, that really taught me about what it might be to perform yourself, to role play as yourself, is a literal performance. I was very lucky to have been cast in a opera. It's the one and only opera that I've ever performed in. And when I told the director that when you're being cast in a performance in a show, one tip is to never admit that you can't do something, or never admit that you've never done something before. But when I was being cast in an opera, I felt it was important to tell the director that I'd never been in one before, to which her response was that that was good because she'd never directed one before. So it was quite wonderful, an experience of learning something through doing, through co-creating a world. That director was Susan Austin, who is a noted queer feminist director here in Sweden. And she invited myself and a cast of performers who weren't used to improvising, playing, to come and reimagine a very old opera, which in English is called The Merry Widow, in German, Die Lustige Witwe, and in Swedish, Glada Änkan. And we were going to reproduce this script that was over 100 years old, and we were going to do it in a new way. And what she did was she just invited us into this hall for 3 weeks and just had us not perform our characters that we'd been cast as, not try to create characters, just to play. We were given certain rule sets and environments just to experience, to try out things. We were cast in a ballroom scene to dance with each other as characters that we made from clothes that we were handed. We were asked to experience the same scene as a child and to run around and express ourselves. And what I didn't realize at the time was that she was asking us to do this, not just for her to start to construct her version of this particular opera, but for us to activate ourselves, to find aspects of ourselves, to learn how to express ourselves in these roles. And it was truly wonderful. And I had no idea what I was doing at the time, but in hindsight, and there's video of this on YouTube if you're desperately interested to see what it looks like to have grown opera singers jump up and down on a couch wearing balloons on their heads. It's really special. And in the end, what happened was I was originally cast in a particular role that's in this opera. And I got a phone call from the director who said, after we'd done this wonderful experience, she said, yeah, we're going to give you another role. And I was like, okay, this is sort of death as an actor, you sort of feel like you're being changed. And she said, yeah, we're going to give you this character. We don't really know who she is yet. We're calling her Josephine. And the idea is that you'll be on the stage as this play goes on, experiencing it through your eyes and responding to it as we go along, because that's the character we saw in your play, in your role play. We saw this you-ness that we want to include in this performance. And it was truly an honor, as well as incredibly daunting task. So every night for about a year, I go on stage and perform myself in a play, watching a play, trying to interact with this play. And every night was a role play. Every night was an attempt to find a role that I would project to an audience, interact with these other actors, but try to express me. And this invitation to play as myself was truly transformational and led to experiences that I didn't really understand at the time. I think I'm still processing, because as I'm writing now about trans experience of role playing and playing in games and playing as performance and performing in everyday life, I find I'm still thinking about that experience. I have a picture right up here, which you can't see on the wall, of that particular show, because it means so much to me. And I think, yeah, that was truly transformational in the sense that it really asked me to be myself.
If you like, we can include the links in the comments.
For sure.
underneath.
Yes, you can see me dancing with a giant pirate hat on and huge skirt. We'll call it transformational, but it's amusing to watch.
Thank you so much. Sparkles.
Yes, and as you said, Josephine, we have all of us many different transformative play experiences behind us. I have a number, some of them very deep and some slightly lighter. And I'm going with one of the lighter because it actually had a huge impact in my life, and it's the reason I'm here right now. And that is when I started studying game design. One of the first courses we had was in educational games. And we got to play a game. And we went into this thinking, well, we're here to learn about games, so doing a game, that's not very weird. And the game was called The Commune. And it's about a hippie community that have house meetings once a week where they make decisions and try to get along. And we got different things we were supposed to get along about. So we had, for example, we have one person is leaving, so we now have an extra room. So do we want to take in another person? And we need to vote about that. And it was about smoking inside. Should that be allowed or not? And having huge discussions as these characters about yes or no, and try to say why or why not. And we had rules for if you want this to pass, you need to have like a majority, or you need to have 2/3 and so on. And we all thought this was fun and dandy. And when it was like done, we were super disappointed because we wanted to keep going and just playing because it was super just immersive and super fun. And then came a part that in some ways actually were even better. And that was the discussion we had after. Because that's where it became transformative, because everything was thrown around. Because all of a sudden they tell us that you have now been role-playing the EU. And we're like, what are you talking about? No, we have not. We have been super silly and just, they're like, yes. But each of you is a country in the EU having a meeting, trying to take a vote if we should let another country join. And we use the same numbers that you need to have to actually allow a country to come in. And we started talking about, okay, if these like characters, these 20 characters had such a problem just getting along, how hard is it when we're talking countries? Maybe there's a reason that things take time and then we have bureaucracy, and it's not just we all agree and it's done. And that really was transformative in the way that it just changed how I look at learning in many ways. That you could do this, and that shift was interesting, and the discussion around it became so much better than what I had experienced in school. I mean, if we were talking about number of votes in the EU, that was super boring, but this was super interesting. And this then made me bring this with me and go out and in the end create my career and my life around this, to actually start designing games. I did a game as part of that course that then got bought up by the same people who had run the commune, and I started working for them for a while, doing games and just finding my way in through all of this, realizing that this is something I want to do. And if that's not transformative, I'm not sure what is.
Yeah, one of the principles that I have in my research, because I'm interviewing people like Josephine about, how they got into this, is that they wouldn't be doing this if they hadn't had a transformative experience. So I'm just going to assume that you have. So that's sort of also the basis behind this question. And so if we could ask Doris the same question, what is a personally transformative experience that you've had through games or performance?
Yeah. I think I've been on a lifelong quest to befriend my anger and my passion and the fiery side of me. Like I'm I have a lot of that, but I've also been brought up to be very conscientious and very mindful of other people's feelings and needs. So I've always been very empathetic as well, to the point where I was hardly able to tell my roommate in college that I really did not enjoy her studying until 4 a.m. with her desk lamp more or less in my face, because my bed was right next to her desk. And I just didn't know how to navigate that. And when I was a postdoc at MIT, I played Dungeons and Dragons, and I played a tiefling, and it was really great, because the whole point of this was I could make fire with my fingers, and I was supposed to be in your face, and I was supposed to be rude, and I was supposed to be fiery, and all of that. Now I have a tiefling tattoo on my back. This is recent, so it's still catching up with me. That was like 15 years ago. And it was so liberating to do this. But what was missing at the time was exactly what you just said, Sparkles. There was no debrief. There was no conversation around this. It was just an experience that I had. It felt really good. The moment it was over, I was back to this struggle of politeness versus authentic roar. That's a word now. And then I had a bit of a more reflective experience. So sorry, I'm kind of gaming this question by bringing 2 examples. I was playing Bluebeard's Brides with a bunch of very smart friends, and I was assigned the witch character. And I was really glad I was assigned the witch character, because I just had to be the witch character. And you play, there's a group of people, and they play different aspects of the bride. So they're all called sisters, but they're just different personality aspects. And they're based on archetypes. And so I had the archetype of the witch, and my the character that I had an alliance with was the archetype of the mother. And the mother actually said, well, we're the only 2 grown-ups in the room, even though I was fierce and power hungry and like not very nice. But again, it was so incredibly liberating to just be that and not apologize for it. And then afterwards having conversations about it, what that felt like, how others actually felt protected by my fierceness. It's like, what? There is something positive in my shadow. Are you kidding me? There is something that you can actually benefit from, and I'm not all, taking myself back and trying not to step on anybody's toes. It's okay. You don't hate me now, not just because this was only a game, but also because there is a quality in this. So you think I could actually harness that afterwards and put a little bit of that into my real life? That blows my mind. So I think it was all of these different experiences that were already there. And then the one that really made it click for me was the one that had this conversation afterwards. So yeah, good stuff.
Thank you so much. And I have personally benefited from your fire. So just to validate that. Sure.
Let me start by saying I had the great fortune of being first on the last question, now last on this. So I've just been listening to you folks, and I also have the great luck of being able to talk with you, all of you, quite often. But every time it's just, you all just bring it. It's amazing, and your origin stories and everything. I just had to get that out of the way first. As everybody else here, I've had quite a few transformative experiences. The biggest one, of course, being over several years, where through role-playing, me and my now wife found out that we should be married and we should be together. That would take 5 hours to talk about. So I would talk about how I've had a transformative experience as a designer, as a creator of games. A few years back, I had a pretty severe health scare, where things could have gone a lot worse than they did. And just before that happened, I had lost all of my grandparents in a fairly short amount of time, 3 of them within a year. And that was something that was pretty pretty heavily on my mind when I went through my own experience. And so what I did during and after that health scare had resolved, I designed a game called Hello in There, which is a game about couples. And the players play these couples over a period of 50 years. Like we just visit them at different times in their lives together. And ultimately, it is about growing old. And of course, at the end, it's also about passing away. And designing this game and then running it for players who had, I gave a little bit of context at the beginning of why I had created the game, but they really had no idea of the process I had gone through to create this. But just seeing them take it on and just take it to places and heights that I had never even imagined, that in many ways transformed me as a creator. It was the first time I could really say that, oh, this has been me processing what I've experienced myself in my own life, but also from the feedback from the players afterwards, there was a lot of similar experiences and other experiences that got processed through them playing the LARP that I designed. And going on from there, I know what I as a designer can achieve, and it influences a lot of what I do as a game designer and creator now.
Thank you so much. You know, as many people have said, there's lots of experiences I could share, but I think the most profound, the one that comes up the most, has to do with playing Just a Little Leaven, which is the LARP about HIV/AIDS that has been run several times in the last decade, and actually is going to be published in a book form soon. So if you're interested in that, that will be out in the next few months. But I've played it 3 times, and Xiao has played it 3 times as well. Some different runs. Josephine Westport has also played it twice. Yeah, it's a really powerful experience that has a lot of dimensions, including obviously dealing with fear of illness and death, but also love and desire and community are huge themes, which all of those things are very resonant with me. I've played the same character in all 3 runs. Most people would prefer to play a new character to see a different part of the game because there's lots of complex emotional dynamics, but I wanted to play this character that was really attuned to her spirituality and was a community leader that was able to kind of help people in their own times of struggle. And at times that I played her, I also went through my own health times of struggle as that character. So what was interesting about this experience was I know that I've always been a spiritual person, but I haven't allowed myself to explore that path very much because I'm an academic now and I have to be intellectual and I have to put all that aside, and you know that's not real anyway. So I have to be careful not to dabble too much into this terrain that makes people so uncomfortable, as I mentioned earlier, the unconscious, or you know any other kind of states that don't feel like they're part of quote unquote reality as it is defined in our social reality. And so I haven't really I hadn't at the time dove in deep into meditation or any kinds of practices like that. But playing this character for 3 days, I started experiencing these blissful states of calm and peace, and I was able to hold space for other people in that way. And when I de-rolled from that character, and this is a LARP that has very careful de-rolling, debriefing, processing, of all these kinds of experiences. But even with all of that care, the first time I played her, when I tried to de-roll, I immediately had a panic attack question, as the self that I am every day and all the worries that I bring with me and that I store in my consciousness and in my body, all of a sudden became me, quote unquote me. And, since I say that, quote unquote, I've always thought that these are parts of us. I was able to say, now I know that I can get to this psychological state by pretending that I'm a person who already knows how to do this, right? So that means that I know how to get there. So every time I've played this character since then, I've learned more and more. And so that when I have those transitions in and out of character, they feel much more seamless. But it was only through playing that character that I realized that I could be a person that can achieve those kinds of states, because I believed for many years that I just had too much anxiety and there was no way I was ever going to be able to meditate or anything like that. So that's just an example of a way that I've consciously used play and specific play experiences to develop skills within myself, but also done the work outside of those contexts to reinforce that learning. And that's one of the main things that we're going to be focusing on with regard to our program and what we're creating. So that seems like a good transition to our final major question, which is, our dream of an ideal program involves blank. And so each of us are going to talk about some of the components that we're developing. And some of this is aspirational. We're very new, and this is all very exciting. Some things may come to pass, some may not, but this is sort of an overview of our dreams. Doris told me to think big, dream big, put together a wish list. And so I was like, well, okay. And so we're going to outline what all of us have contributed to that wish list. So Doris, would you like to just kind of go over the graduate program ideas that we have?
Yep. It's funny because I came to Uppsala because I thought I'll be closer to where these things are happening. I didn't know I would actually bring them to Gotland and we would make them happen right here. So this is super duper exciting. So what we're planning very concretely right now is a 1-year, half-time, purely online program centered around transformative role-playing games for professionals in helping professions. So people who already have a background and experience in caring for others, nursing, leadership, counseling, youth work, spiritual direction, anything like that, who want to harness the power of role-playing games to bring forth transformation personally, socially, culturally, environmentally. They are what we are looking for to bring to this program, to work with them, play with them, learn with them, and help them fulfill their goals also. There is also a possibility to segue into a second year. So we have several tracks for master programs, or we're building several tracks for master programs right now at the department. One already exists. It's more focused around games and society, and this one specifically on transformative play. And there should be a third one on player psychology and user research and creating an actual digital game. And they all can move towards a second year where students take further electives and then focus on a longer thesis project. But it is also absolutely possible to only do the 1-year program, which would then take 2 years because it runs half-time, so it is accessible for people who have jobs and who can live anywhere because it is purely online. Did I forget anything, Sarah?
Eventually, we're planning on developing a PhD program if things come to pass the way that we would like them to, which of course there's lots of things in the air with regard to that, but yes. And the idea behind the online masters is for it to be accessible for people all over the world, because we have a lot of contacts in many different locations that are doing educational role playing or running a LARP camp or doing therapy around the table with clients using role playing games, that kind of thing. And so it would be amazing to have people from all of these different environments able to come in at the same time and learn from each other and design together. So that was the idea behind that. That being said, we do have interest in events, which Precocious will go over in a second. But Sparkles, would you like to deepen a little bit into the masters that we're developing and sort of the structure of it?
Yes, absolutely. So when we're looking at this, we are thinking not just about the design. That is one part, the actual design of the game. But we are also looking at implementation. How do we use this game? What do we need to think about? We talked here about the discussion after, or how do we need to prep? How do we create a safe environment? What are needed around the actual game and how to do that and to implement it? And then we have the research part, to learn about what has been researched, what is still open, and what can we find out more about, and how do I do this? How do I create my own research? Which leads us to the fourth part, which is publication, where it's focused about giving back to the community, whether it is writing academic papers, doing research, or whether it is documenting what we are doing and talking about it in our community, just sharing practice in a not as academic way, but more practical way, but actually giving back and taking what we have learned. And this is something we also want to bring in how we teach and how we work with this in our program, to actually get to design and try to use it and apply it and write about it, and hopefully also share what we have learned during the program, not just outside of it and after, but to combine that and practice what we preach a bit. So yeah.
Thank you. So just to add to that, because there is design focus, there's also a play testing focus. So there will be requirements to be able to meet with each other for play testing and critique in a synchronous fashion like we're doing now in the Zoom meeting, although a lot of the degree will be able to be asynchronous. So, people can, if they're in certain professions where they have very limited time, they can engage in those bits at their leisure. So yes, let's transition to talk to Precocious about some of the events that we're creating as an adjunct to this education.
Yeah, well, as my fellow fabulous teammates have already said, that there are several layers to this. And one of the things that we want to do is to represent the expertise in the field, but also to make it as accessible in as many opportunities as possible. So obviously there is a desire to share lectures from experts in the field, to gather them together in this environment so that they can share what they have been studying, what they've been researching on, their theories and their perspectives on that level. And also to provide workshops that we can engage with in a communal sense, to work on those ideas, to develop those ideas, and to develop ourselves. Further to that, we also want to have town hall experiences that are accessible to everyone, that people can share in a more sort of like informal method, that they can share short versions of what they're doing and express those and be as openly as possible. And finally, and I forgot to mention, the idea of having roundtables, not dissimilar to this one, as Sarah just pointed out, of having people who are doing these kinds of work come together and share those experiences in yet another accessible format, so that we can share what we're doing and bring that to as many people as possible.
And part of the premise behind this is that, in order to create environments for transformation, we actually first need to create transformative communities around those that can actually hold space and hold the container for that, which is what we're doing with our little group, and we hope can also be done in these classes and in these events. I also wanted to just mention that the events that we just described, most of them should be available online and accessible, but we also do want to have some in-person events on Gotland. And Kjell will talk to us a little bit about what that might look like, as well as some other infrastructural information about the Transformative Play Initiative.
Well, I was told that I can, what I dream of this to be. So I hope people in the finance department are taking notes. Play can exist anywhere. It is not dependent on a physical location. But for some types of play, physical locations or physical scaffolding is necessary. And Gotland has so many wonderful qualities in this sense. Not only is it a place that already has wonderful locations where one can actually play, be it landscapes, buildings, and so on, but the campus there is closely interconnected with the region, with the town of Visby. There are so many synergies going on there. So what we would wish to see is for instance, black box spaces where we can have freeform scenarios, chamber LARPs, and play those sort of like in a theater setting, with technical equipment needed to create the spaces we want. Personally, I hope that at some point we will create maybe a maker space where we can create gadgets, where we can use play around with sensors and how can we create these things that we can interact with in our physical play environment. And also a particular interest for me myself is how can we take the great things from live action role play and merge them with the great things from digital games, and create maybe a new way of thinking about transformative games, making them more accessible to people and not be so dependent on location or physical proximity to in this case Visby. And I would say there is really no limit to the potential of creating physical scaffolding and infrastructure around this initiative. But as Sarah pointed out, it starts with the community. It starts with people coming together to create something. Physical scaffolding infrastructure is only created to support the people who create these experiences. But hopefully we will have a lot of it.
And I just wanted to ask Sparkles really quickly, if for people who don't know about Gotland, if you could explain Medieval Week, because I know that you attend.
Wow. Yeah, the Medieval Week is 1 week a year where the city of Visby is an old medieval city, one of the few that is more or less, but yeah, intact since the actual medieval times in the city center. So you have the old cobblestone roads and you have really, really old houses, and it's an amazing setting. And each year they have been having this week where they do loads of things and people dress up in medieval clothes, and there are people competing, pretending to be, what do you call it? Knights on horses, and you have people just hanging out, traveling from all over Sweden to get there, spending a year just sewing, making amazing clothes. And each year they usually have a little play around a specific year, so it's different every year. But then, of course, since it's a community, you have groups popping up that you have a bunch of people dressing like from the 1600s, you have a bunch of pirates, you have some groups that are not really the standard medieval groups showing up also. And you have a huge market where you can buy stuff that are connected to this. And yeah, it's amazing. And check it out. Just check out Visby online to see the pictures if you haven't heard about it or seen it before.
And so this school is located in a community that most of the year is pretty quiet, but then over the summer it just swells with all of these people coming in to play, essentially, which is why we keep saying that it's such an ideal location for this kind of work. Well, we're coming to the end of our roundtable, and I just wanted to go around and see what people's final thoughts are. I think for me, I just love hearing more about you more and more each time I hear your stories, and I get a little bit more information and more insight into what brought you here. We connect so deeply, the five of us, and we collaborate so easily, and that's a truly unique and beautiful thing. So it's really amazing to get to work and be inspired every day by the people that you work with. Thank you for that. And let's go with Shao next.
I honestly think Gothland is and can be an even greater playground in the future. And one is told that one should surround oneself with people one can learn from. And that is really the case here. I learn from the people here all the time. And I'm pretty sure that students that would choose to come to Gothland would have exactly the same experience that I'm having right now.
Thank you. And Precocious.
I've been trying to think of a way to express what it means for me personally to be here. I say it to this wonderful group pretty regularly. I think I find myself writing. I'm trying to think of a way to express what it means to be here. I've had enough challenges in my life to know how lucky I feel that I am to be in the place that I am with a community of people who, like Shell said, I can learn from, that I can share things with, and then I can discover this fabulous world of transformational play, and to discuss it and to consider it the ways that I have. I find in reflection that I've pretty much spent my life trying to seek out transformational play experiences of one kind or another. Through our conversations, I find I'm considering more and more. And I have this opportunity here to write about experiences that I didn't even have words for a few years ago, to communicate about experiences that I literally had no language for. One of the things that I've been studying is trans experience, something that we often don't talk about in our communities, that we don't have information about or even education about. So there sometimes aren't words for it, but there are chances to play, and there are chances to explore, and chances to consider. And I have that chance here. So I'm tremendously grateful for that. So I'm working on it. And in the meantime, I'm really excited to get to explore transformational play here at this campus, with this university, and particularly with this great group of people.
Thank you. I think a lot of us can relate to having difficulty finding the words to describe the thing. So we do a lot of talking around it, but we're going to get better at that. And then our fearless leader can take us out with her final thoughts. Doris?
Yeah, no pressure. As I said before, this is really very much a dream come true. And I'm very optimistic that we will really fully realize it. I believe strongly in the synchronicities that come when you follow the path of your heart, when you follow an authentic path and you bring the best people together that you could possibly bring together to do this, who share a vision, who have chemistry, who are really committed. And that makes me also very, very hopeful for the community we're going to build around this with our students and the broader network of other researchers and practitioners that Sparkles and Precocious and Shell and Sarah are connected to. The emails that we have already gotten through our email list and the interest that is already happening around this really small, growing the seedling of an initiative is already mind-blowing, and it's super thrilling, super exciting to see what we can build together. And I'm just, yeah, I'm in it for the ride. Let's do it. This is awesome. Thank you for doing this.
And with that, you can reach us through, we have a Facebook page, Transformative Play Initiative on Facebook. We are also associated with the Games and Society Lab, which is sort of a larger lab at the Department of Game Design at Uppsala. And that also has a Facebook page that you're welcome to look at to see what our colleagues in our department are also doing, which is pretty awesome. And we have a mailing list that I will put the info for in the description of this video. You're welcome to email us at our email anytime. And with that, I think we will say goodbye.
I'm jumping in.
Go ahead.
I didn't get to say my final thoughts.
Sorry.
It's fine. I'm doing it now instead.
Okay.
And that is actually the thing I wanted to say that I have loved about this experience, is that we have not been working together very long. We are new to each other. And we are at a stage where we work really well together and we can disagree. And that is so important, I feel, in a group. And it's very uncommon. I feel that happens so early on, that we can do that and say, I love that idea. I also absolutely disagree, which we did earlier today. And that is great because we are different. As you heard, we have different backgrounds. And I love that also for our program and for our students to come in with different perspectives, which for me also is a big part of the academic world, to look at things from different perspectives and not always agreeing, but still see value in each other's perspectives and in each other's as humans. And I think that is happening here. And I want that to be part of this whole initiative, also for people taking part in any way they can, whether it's watching lectures we put up or taking part in the actual program, studying, or just being part of a town talk. Like in any way, I really appreciate that. So thank you.
I'm so sorry for skipping you. That was not intentional. But I definitely agree that one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is, people are going to have vastly different backgrounds coming into this program. And that can be difficult sometimes to transmit what it is you do if someone else does something so different or has a very different perspective. But ideally, we all have a commitment to making the world a better place and to changing lives for the better, and to help to restructure society, hopefully, learn how to figure out ways of being that are more conducive to thriving, to having a good life for people, to having their basic needs being met. And I just want to presence that we realize that we come from a tremendous place of privilege to be able to say these things, and we understand that. And one of our goals is to give people the tools to empower people who maybe don't have as much privilege and who really could use these empowerment tools in their lives to figure out how to move forward. So this commitment to service really is at the center of what we do. So even if people come from very different backgrounds, we do look for that particular thing from our students. All right, well, second time. Bye.